I'm the exception to it, not the norm. And I'll say that by saying this. I've said since I started in this industry, there are good businessmen and there are good pavers and seal coaters. We doubled in revenue.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
We almost quadrupled in profitability, and we didn't hire a single employee other than me.
How long did it take? All right, well, thank you so much for being willing to do this. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and share your story. So the best place to start for us is to jump on into the very beginning. Take your time and tell us, how did you end up becoming, I guess, one of the largest franchisees for SealMaster?
So at the time, I was living in Ohio, where the headquarters of SealMaster is, and I grew up on a big farm, but I also had to work a real job to help support the family and everything. And we knew the founder of SealMaster, but I knew him in a different circle of life. His name was Dave Weichel. He started the company in 1969, and but I knew him as Dave Weichel, a friend of my grandfather's, and so that's how I got to know him. And he'd come up, and we knew each other by name and that kind of stuff. And then he owned a rental company in Sandusky, Ohio, near where the SealMaster was. And we'd went up to get some equipment to clear some fence rows and make the fields larger for our farm. And he sort of asked, how's work going? And so I did. I went over there, and little did I know, the second in command over there was a guy by the name of Dave Shoup, and he was my mentor in the business. And I walked in and said, are you guys hiring? The lady gives me a application like everybody does, and I start filling it out, and all of a sudden I hear Sayler, and I look up, and it's Dave, a different Dave, not the founder, but Dave Shoup, who ended up being my mentor. And he's like, stop filling that out. He's like, we're always looking for good, farm boys and that kind of stuff. And so I go in and we start talking, and how I knew Dave was he was from our hometown. So he knew me growing up, and he's like, look, I know your background. I know what you're capable of, that kind of stuff. And he's like, we're always looking for guys like that. So sort of started off on the ground floor, literally doing, equipment and machining and building the equipment, to apply the SealMaster product. And
It's like manufacturing the equipment?
manufacturing equipment, yeah.
Wow.
So I got to where I knew the equipment inside and out. And, we'd had a few ideas of what we could do to improve equipment and that kind of stuff. And I would bring that stuff to them, and, we'd make the changes and make it better. And so that made me get noticed. And then we sort of transitioned from just doing the equipment to where he wanted me to start going on the road and installing the plants around the country as they sold franchises. So I started doing that a little bit. And so again, get not only knowing the equipment for the application side, but then the equipment for the manufacturing side, and getting that exposure. And then my wife and I, we'd gotten married and started having kids, and didn't want to travel.
Still based in Ohio, just traveling a lot?
Yep, still based in Ohio. And the travel at that point was limited because you don't sell a franchise every day. So it was, few and far between, but we would do it. And at first it was fun, and then it was like, I'm having to ask my dad and brothers to take care of the cattle and that kind of stuff when I'm gone. And so they had a void that they needed filled on the sales side of it. And to me, I just always pictured sales as like the used car salesman, the big old fat belly and gold rings and a gold necklace, and, come on in. And I'm like, I want no part of that. I'm too old fashioned, too old school for that kind of, I just don't want. And he's like, that's not what it is. And so they sort of forced me out of doing that and into sales. So after doing sales. I sort of fell in love with it, actually.
Hmm.
One of the best and my favorite parts for it was meeting guys like Brad and those guys that, they're just blue collar, good people. They need you to get them what they need from you, and they're hardworking. They're self-made entrepreneurs, and I
Did
was
you
like,
call on Brad?
well, at this time I'm still in Ohio, so I didn't know Brad at that time, but same type of people.
Was the sales of the franchise, or when you say move to sales, those sales of actually
Sales
SealMaster?
in the Ohio territory for SealMaster. I didn't, again, I had fallen in love with the sales. I'd fallen in love with dealing with the people. And, to me, it was, when I was in the Ohio territory, the guys really started to lean on me for, hey, my machine's doing this, or, this is messing up. And I was the type of guy where I'd keep a change of clothes in the truck and a toolbox in the back seat at all times. I would go and work on their stuff, and I didn't charge them anything. It was just I was going to see them anyways, and or I'd be walking around with them. I'm like, hey, you need to address this. This is going to be a problem soon. Pointing that stuff out, and they'd have their mechanics fix it, and they're like, man, how we missed that, I don't know. But there was value that as a salesperson, I started adding that. I don't know. It's a good feeling. You get people that they really value you and what you have to offer them and that kind of stuff. And so again, when they forced me into managing the franchise system, I was like, this is not, I don't want to do this. But they forced me. And so sort of fast forward, one of the, and looking back, one of the coolest things that I got to do was I got to go around the country and I got to see some of the brightest minds in the industry on what they had done to streamline, make more efficient, their plants all around the country. So I got to go, and I then, instead of the blue collar customer in Ohio that I was dealing with these franchise owners. But I had that same type of mentality, that same relationship with those guys of like, hey, say in Allentown, Pennsylvania, they're doing this, but this guy's in, LA or Phoenix, or, and you start saving them money, making them more efficient, that kind of stuff. And that same kind of bond, gets formed. So again, I started to fall into that, okay, this isn't so bad, role. And I had that same relationship just at a different level at that point. But, sort of going back to the San Antonio, he asked me if we could do dinner. And, to this day, I still talk to him. And, we sat down for dinner and he said, one thing that most business owners don't do is pay attention to their exit strategy. Most of them don't have it. They're so worried about building their business and getting it going and getting it off the ground and that kind of stuff. They just don't know how to. And they're business owners. They're not business sellers. They operate their own business. And most of them at our level are very hands-on, running the day-to-day and that kind of stuff. And, he said, well, every successful business owner should have an exit strategy. And I said, okay. I said, well, what's yours? And again, I'm thinking we're just having dinner. And he said, well, what I've seen from being in the system, and he had owned two at that point, which was Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then Denver, Colorado, and had been in it. He was one of the oldest franchises in the country. And, he said, the talent that I've seen come out of you and what you're willing to do, your experience, your knowledge, the way you think is just different than anybody else. And he said, I'd like you to come and work for me. And I said, well, the problem with that is in our, employment agreement and their franchise agreement, we aren't allowed to go to work for a franchise. So, my mentor again, Dave Shoup, I went and I talked to him about it. And, I went and I talked to our franchisor because I had told the gentleman that owned Colorado, I said, if it's not in the good graces of, Duke Thorson, which is the franchisor, I said, obviously, we can't do that. It'd be a breach of your contract and mine. And I went and I talked to Duke about it, and Duke had started the Colorado franchise in 1988. At that point, it was a licensee, not a franchise. And he said, there's nobody in the business that I could think of that I'd rather have run that business than you. And to this day, Duke still says that I grew up in his house. He's like, you came from literally the ground floor and worked your way up. And we're still close. We still text. I consider my mentor in the business, I always call him Uncle Shoot. There's probably 4 of us within the SealMaster system that are franchise owners that we make it a point to reach out to the new guys getting in, and we spend time with them at the owners meetings so that they're comfortable enough with us so that, if they're not going to call the franchisor or the big guy, Dave up at corporate, they'll reach out to us and we'll help them and do that kind of stuff. And there's still reps that manage the system and come around and do that stuff. But again, they want to hear it from somebody who's lived through it, been there, done it. So, and then we have, a bunch of other insurance boards and that kind of stuff that we're on, and, the same, pretty much I would say 4 owners of the franchises that we're heavily involved on that. And then we have a advisory council that we get voted on to sort of be the voice for the franchises to the franchisor. And they like me on that because, again, of my relationship with Duke and the franchisor and the corporation up there. So,
So how'd you get from the licensure holder in Colorado to Georgia?
Okay, so we went through sort of down to the 11th hour on purchasing that, and the bank wanted a business evaluation to see if the president of the bank wanted a business evaluation to make sure that the business was worth what we were saying it was. He said, on paper, obviously, let me back up and say this. So going back to, Duke blessing me going to Colorado, we doubled in revenue.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
We almost quadrupled in profitability,
Wow.
and we didn't hire a single employee
How long did it take?
other than me. That was by probably year 3.
Wow.
We did have to make some investments in equipment and manufacturing facility and some tanks and that kind of stuff. But as far as employees, not a single employee was added.
So if I remember the story right, and not to interject with my opinion, but kind of just from my memory, you were brought out there to have a succession plan, and through that succession plan, the business just exploded.
Yeah.
And as a result of that explosion, it changed some people's feelings about the succession and where it all was going to go, right?
Yeah, and I was starting to tip on that. That what really started the mindset change was when the bank required the business evaluation.
Did you already agree on a price before that?
We had a multiple of EBITDA
Yeah.
agreement.
Which you had grown.
Yeah, which the whole time I'm growing it, and that's what everybody, back at the corporate was like, man, you better take your foot off the gas a little bit. You're costing yourself some money here. And I'm like, it's organically. I mean, we're doing this. I'm not going to not supply my people. Like it'll come back to me tenfold. Just watch. So we had the business evaluation done, and it came back way higher than what the price was that we were going to be paid for it. So then it was, well, we're not going to sell it unless we get this out of it. And you can't really force somebody to sell something like that. And obviously, being a small farm kid from Ohio, they were helping me do it. I didn't have millions of dollars to invest in it and that kind of stuff. So
They were going to do owner financing?
part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which most business deals like this, they require a seller finance of some sort. In fact, when I came to Georgia, The bank, again, required, they loved the story. They loved, I had the business valuation. I had the numbers I could show them, like, this is what I've done there. The only question was, can you repeat it? And so I said, well, this is what I did when I was in Ohio sales. I did it there. This is what I did in Colorado. I did it there. And here's all the proof for all that. And then I just told them what I was going to do in Georgia. But again, they required a seller note because they want to know that the seller is going to be as comfortable as the bank is. You
Yeah.
know, they want to have some skin in the game too. And so at any rate, so we went, and it was sort of one of those, okay, well, if you can't afford to pay that much more, how about you run it 2 more years? Let us get the money out of it. And that'll be the difference, roughly, in what our price was to what we want out of it now. And I picked up the phone, and again, I had known Dick Loafman, which was the guy that I bought the Georgia and Alabama franchise from, for years. In fact, I was one of the first people that he met from corporate after he bought the franchise, which I think he bought in '94. And then I came down, he was buying the property that the plant sits on. And there was an old tank and an old semi that with a franchisor had owned the property and the equipment on it. And part of the agreement to purchase it was it had to be cleaned up. So Duke sent me and one other guy down to come down and clean up the property so that Duke could sell it to Dick Loafman. And I sort of show up, and they were supposed to have torches and, a backhoe and all this stuff. Well, me being on the farm, I was extremely handy with both of those. I think they allotted like 3 or 4 days to do it, and I had it done in 1 day. And, Dick was an Ohio boy too, so he knew, and he came from the paving industry and being familiar with running equipment. And, he sort of made the comment of, I can tell that you're not your first rodeo, you obviously run that pretty good. And they come back, and they took their sweet time to go get it, and which we went and got lunch and whatever, but finish that up. But my point was Dick had known me for a very long time, and I was one of the first people from the corporate world that he had met. I mean, he had met Duke and all those guys through buying it. But back to, them asking me to run it 2 more years versus...
Were they willing to sign a contract, like locking in the?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we also had a written agreement as well.
Prior.
Yeah. And at the time, Dick had just been diagnosed with cancer. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
Yeah. And Dick had recently gotten these guys in or helped get these guys in the business.
Absolutely.
Through the blackjack and helping them with anything SealMaster had to offer and that kind of stuff. But
Can you briefly tell that story? How Dick helped you guys get started?
Yeah, we kind of jumped into the whole seal coating and striping parking lot thing, and we were learning it off the internet. And if we saw somebody on the side of the road doing it, we would try to pick their brain, and we were really just ad-libbing. And we were told by people that we met in the industry, there were two major franchisees that sold parking lot maintenance products in the Atlanta market, and that was Jim Seal and SealMaster. And we felt that we were the small guy, that we were going to be scrappy at the bottom. We weren't, and we were hardly even going to be able to compete with the big companies, which at that time would have been like a wildcat. People told us, the small guys, all the mom and pops, they all buy from Jim Seal. The big boys, that's more corporate, that's more structured. They're all buying from SealMaster. So we went and set up an account at Jim Seal, and we having a pretty good relationship, but nothing spectacular, nothing crazy. We were trying to make ends meet, and one day Dick walked into our office, and he'd heard about us, and he said, something like, "You guys have been making a stir in the industry, and I heard all about you. I just had to come down and meet you." And instantly, he was like, "Look, fellas, you got an account tomorrow." And he had the attitude that we needed We needed support. We needed guidance. We needed information. And from that point on, I could pick up my phone and I could call Dick, and it was instantaneous what that guy would do for us, information wise. Talk us through a problem, meet us on the job site, walk the job site with us. And he literally, like Chad said, he wouldn't, be here with a lot of his mentors. And in the paving industry, wow. Dick did for Jay and I a tremendous job.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I don't know I've ever met anybody who didn't enjoy being around that guy ever to this day. Not one person.
So I think you were at the point where you were picking up the phone and calling Dick.
Yeah, so I called Dick, and he had just been diagnosed with cancer, and he had started his treatments, but it changed his outlook on life for sure. And he's got a few boys himself that just didn't want, they through their high school years and that kind of stuff had been up at the plant and just decided they don't want anything to do with it.
And Dick at that point was in his 70s, early 70s? I'm asking.
Ballpark, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because, he was a mentor to me in the industry for sure. And he would always be glad to generous and take us to dinners or lunches. And it was always a brain picking session. But one thing he kept challenging me on was a succession plan. He's like, you can't start planning early enough. And so I could tell he wasn't 100% telling me, hey, I wish I had one. But it didn't take much to read between the lines. And he was saying, I wish I had one. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this.
He was a deer in the headlights for sure.
Yeah.
So when I called him, he said, the funny thing about that is my brother, who lives in Loveland, Colorado. So I'm in Henderson, Colorado, just outside of Denver, talking to a man in Atlanta, Georgia, who just hired a firm in Loveland, Colorado, which is 30 miles from my house in Colorado, to do a business evaluation to start thinking about how he can get out of it. And, Dick was one of the people that when I went to Colorado after I got the blessing of the franchisor, he said, if I'd have known I could have done that, he'd have been here years ago. He's like, but I knew we couldn't take and he said, I remember him telling me this. He said, I was upset when I heard that you went to Colorado because it says clear as day, you cannot take from the corporate office. You can't take their employees. And, so again, that was one of the reasons why I reached out to him. And he said, your timing's impeccable. So
let's go back to, not to stop this because this is a good part, but you came to Georgia.
Yep. I came to Georgia. Man, we had a couple rough goes too. We thought we had a deal done with a bank because, again, sort of rewinding back to in Colorado, we had always done all of our banking with Wells Fargo. Our banker left, and one of the franchisor's right-hand men up at the corporate office always said, there's bankers at every bank. But it's crucial to a successful business at this level to have a relationship with their banker.
And that's hard to find in today's world.
It is.
It's really hard to find.
I still have it to this day. And we left Wells Fargo to go to Colorado Business Bank because our banker left and went to them. So we followed our banker for the individual trust, experience, his awareness of what we were doing, his trust when we say something, and a lot of that in the banking world is, there's some tape to sort of jump over and that kind of stuff in the banking world, but a lot of it is those presidents trusting their guys and their judgment and that kind of stuff as well. Because you may check off all the boxes on the paper, but if there's not that conviction in their voice when they take it to the board or something like that, it could all go away, which is exactly what we ran into in Georgia. The first bank, we checked all the boxes, I'm well qualified. Dick was bought in. He was willing to do the seller carry on the portion that they required him to. All of my requirements were, everything was checked, but it got squirrely at the end and they backed out. So at that point, I'm already building a house here. My wife and kids are still back in Colorado, and we're like, man, we're back at square one. I don't know what we're going to do. And Dick looks at me and he goes, I'm going to throw a Hail Mary. I said, okay. He said, let me go and talk to the first guy that came in and ever financed anything on this business. He's like, I had a lot of help from my mother, which was Dick's mom, that, his dad had passed, and they obviously had some money from the paving, business and that kind of stuff. But there was a guy by the name of Bud Turner. And it was at United Community Bank, actually right here. It was in Fairburn. I went to Dick, and I'm in dirty, nasty clothes, and we're sitting on his back patio because I didn't want to go in his house. We're having a beer, and I said, I think I'm going to go to the bank and see if they'll loan me around $2 million more. I want to do an automation system that will streamline the quality and allow us to control not only production, but the biggest thing was the quality of the sealer. And Dick was like, ooh, man, that I don't know. He's like, let me make a phone call. And I said, well, before you do that, I said, let me go home. I said, I want to hop in the shower and I'm going to show you some numbers on paper, and numbers that he was very familiar with, of what our costs were with our, raw materials being brought in and what we call super sacks versus bulk and all this stuff, and being able to cut that down in our return on investment, our ROI. And Dick called me back later that night, and he's like, I was looking at your numbers. He's like, I did the math on it several times. He's like, you're right. And I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you, this is huge. I could. So we had to put in silos. We did the largest rework of that plant, but it's one of the largest that's ever been done in the SealMaster history of, wow, pouring concrete and adding silos and mixers and all this stuff. And wow, it was one of the best things I ever did. But that level of dedication to the industry, to the customers, to my employees, my workforce, the guys weren't lifting big old bags anymore. It's all streamlined, automated. They basically touch a touch screen and it does it. It stops. It won't allow it to go past that step. Say we ran out of something in the silo, or it got clogged and it couldn't come in or whatever, it won't allow them to go to the next step.
How long did it take $2 million to pay off that renovation?
It was probably a year and a half return.
Wow.
It was big.
That's incredible.
It was big. And to put it in perspective, when I bought this company, and I still showed Dick my books. He comes up, his wife does a woman's trip to the beach, and he'll come up and we have lunch. And he's got this one little place off Thornton Road that's an old Italian restaurant he loves to go to. So he comes up, he says hi to he knows them. The personnel that we still have there. We just don't have a lot of turnover. And he's still dressed in his slacks and the guy dresses to the nines. He always has to look professional in his eyes. And I think it actually bothered him that I was in work boots and blue jeans and, like, you got to look the part, and I'm like, look, this is where the bread and butter is made. This is it. I need to make sure this is on track. The rest of that will come. He was sort of the opposite. He wanted to make sure everybody knew that he was the business owner and the brains behind it. And
wow.
In fact, one of the customers that came in, we had a sales lady working for us, and she calls me and she goes, I just talked to Lisa, and she said that she came in there. She's pretty sure she met the owner, but I was literally cleaning something up that had fallen over. and I was sweeping the floor. And she's like, what do you do here? I was like, I'm pretty much the firefighter and janitor. And I finished cleaning it up, and I went on and did my thing. And yeah, so she called me and she's like, did you just tell somebody you were the janitor? And I'm like, I did. So she called her back. She's like, yeah, that was the owner. So I have a different approach to all that. But my point in all that was what we're willing to do as far as reinvesting in the company and our customers and the industry. Nobody else has been willing to do. There were 2 other competitors in town. One still exists. It's a little mom and pop. The other one I ended up buying out in 2020 during COVID. That might have been the biggest argument between me and Courtney we've ever had. She was like, look, this is the biggest epidemic that, or pandemic, whatever you want to call it, that has happened. And you're talking about spending millions of dollars to buy your largest competitor. I think we need to let the dust settle and see where this goes. And I'm like, look, we're doubling down.
Wow.
We're doing it. And I think I told you at lunch, the CEO of that company had first approached me about buying me out. And I said, I'm not finished. There's no way. And he told me that since 2014, I had literally eaten their lunch. They used to be one of the largest of the Gem Seal brand in the country. And we had taken the majority of their business.
Talk about your growth, because the streamlining the manufacturing process had to be huge in that. But then that after you did that, that allowed you to have the quantity to be able to start shipping, right?
Yeah. So not only were we able to, our capacity was quadrupled of what we were able to manufacture, our efficiency. When I bought the business, we had 6 tankers. I've got 52 semi-trailers now. To give you, there were 3 semis. I've got 9.
And what he does with that is he'll deliver product to a major site and drop a tanker and leave it until that tanker's empty. And then with the 9, he'll be moving the other 52. Almost, when you think about the logistics behind scheduling that's, quadrupled. And that takes lots of strategic planning, brain power, and customer service, because Chad can tell story after story about, one of those tankers, whether it be user error or a malfunction, something goes wrong with that tanker. Well, now you've got a dead soldier out there that needs to be fixed. And then the logistics of, redirecting and everything that goes along with that. It's just brought on a lot.
And I told you the story about me driving up to North Carolina to bail out these guys.
For a 10-minute fix.
Yeah, I was there 10 minutes and had it going. And it was operator error. However, that wasn't because I liked these guys that much, which I do. But of those 52 trailers, they were all gone. I didn't have an option. They were there. They had to get the job done. I didn't have any more trailers. Our board was full. Our tankers were all out at jobs. I didn't have a choice. But the bottom line was I wasn't going to tell a customer no, or you need to reschedule, or we need to pick it up, or I knew I could get it fixed. I threw a toolbox and miscellaneous stuff in the back. In fact, I was driving my wife's Yukon at the time. I didn't even have my pickup that day. And she's like, I guess I'll drive the truck again tomorrow, type of.
Yeah.
Because I didn't make it back that night. I had to stop. I was falling asleep on the way back, so I stopped and got a hotel. And I had a change of clothes, but, which now I have a toiletry bag in there too, because you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah. But, that kind of dedication, those are the things that the competitors aren't and haven't been willing to do. And in my opinion, I will own the last little soldier that's out there eventually too. They haven't added any tankers. They haven't added any locations. They haven't added any employees, no rental equipment. We've got a couple $1 million in rental equipment that, when I started there, we had 1.
Where did that mentality come from within you? Like
I'll never tell a customer no.
but where do you think that came from? Because I personally know people who wouldn't have a problem saying no. I mean, and I know what customer service is, and I know where that who has it and who doesn't. But and yes, you have it, meaning you won't.
I won't.
You won't, and I know that. But who instilled that in you? Where did that come from?
If I had to guess, that was probably when, well, in fact, I know it. Allentown, Pennsylvania was always the big dog within the SealMaster system. And I asked him, Daryl Stein is the owner of that. I said, why do you have so much rental fleet? Why do you have, he had grown it similar to what I did. And he said, the bottom line is every time you tell a customer no, or you turn that away, you're limiting yourself to growth. And if there's only so many times a customer is going to come to you when you're telling them, no, I don't have that, or we're booked, or you have to wait until this, he's like, they'll do it occasionally, but if it's a frequent thing, they just stop calling. Mm-hmm. And so to this day, my staff, I said, if you guys create the demand, if you need 6 more of those rentals this year, I don't care, I'll buy them. Don't think I won't be riding your ass when they're sitting here, because I will be. But as long as you have the demand and you can show me, and you've got that commitment, verbal or otherwise, I'll commit to you. I will buy it. And the guy who got Salesman of the Year in 2019 for the entire franchise system within the country left, and he just recently came back to me for that exact reason. He said, anything I ever needed, you always gave to us. If there was a piece of equipment, because those guys have a sense of loyalty to their customers. And there's a fine balance between loyalty to the customer and loyalty to the company. And he walks that well, but he definitely pulls hard for the customers. And he said, never, out of any place I've ever worked, you've always been the best and never told me no at getting us whatever we needed. And so he was there through a lot of the building of that fleet.
What would you say to a business owner who struggles to do that because they're always thinking about, yeah, but if I keep on saying yes, I'm not going to have profit?
Again, I think I told you this at lunch. I never worried about the profit side of it. We took little to no. That time comes. It does. But we took our salary when we could in the beginning. And there comes a point where it's a fine line, right? You need write-offs. You need to spend some money to be able to balance that and have less of a financial burden at the end of the year type of stuff. But I never looked at, it's our time, we need to take this, we need to do that, until it was there and it was plentiful.
Yeah.
And you'll know when you reach that level. You just got to trust your gut.
That's the most common answer from all the business owners I've talked to. It's this concept of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
Of continuing to invest and reinvest and believe in what you're doing, and one day it'll come.
It's similar to what I told you at lunch. We're going. My realtor's meeting me at my house in the morning. We're going to look at 2 buildings tomorrow, and more the next day. And we're constantly looking. If I could add 3 more places tomorrow, I'd do it. And I've found that as the industry becomes more saturated and more mature, it's also harder for the entry level for anybody to come in and compete with that. And if they do, it's going to take them so long to catch up to me because they've been stagnant for so many years. It's like a chess game. They can make a move, but I can checkmate them in no time. So, which is exactly what we do. I mean, they make a move and we move in, and sometimes that might mean that there's some short-term losses you have to take, or tightening up the margins and that kind of stuff. And I just tell people, look, enjoy it while it's here. You got to be better than 2 people. 2 people. He said, don't limit yourself to that. But he said, think about that. There's not a restaurant. He said, what restaurant wouldn't love to say they have two competitors? They only have to be better than two people in town. What marketing firm? There's thousands. We have two competitors.
And then you bought one of them, right?
Yeah, yeah. So now there's one. Then there was one.
For now.
Yeah, for now. You know, but again, you know, like I told you earlier that there was like this. Well, these are their customers and these are our customers with the old competitor that I now own, and I didn't have that mentality. I'm like, you're either with me or you're against me, and I have no problem putting my foot on their throat. I'm good with it. If they're against me, they're against me. That's how it is. And I know it sounds crude, but you know, it's the business side of me. I don't know. I've just always been sort of a bulldog at that. So
let me ask you this question. You scaled the business tremendously since you took it over. I imagine you had to hire a lot of people, right? I would say the number one pain point that we commonly hear with business owners is finding good people, building a good culture, building a strong leadership team. How'd you do that? What advice would you have to people who are trying to build that team?
So one thing that I always do, and it doesn't really matter what industry they're in, I pay attention to whether it's a waiter, somebody at a golf course, somebody at a car detailing place. If you have a pleasant experience and you think that they're a like-minded person, I always give them a business card and tell them to look me up if they're ever looking to make a change. And sometimes my phone just rings, and I'll be honest, some of the opportunities that I've created for myself has been through the phone ringing and that person reaching out to me. Hey, you're not going to remember me. And I'm like, yeah, I remember you, you know. You were at such and such golf course, you know, you did this, you did that. And it blows their mind. But I know every card that I've given out on that type of experience. But once they're there, it's not hard to sit down with me and understand the conviction in my voice, and that I'm very direct, and I mean what I say, and I say what I mean, and they buy in. I mean, I will say, post-COVID has really restored my faith in humanity. You know, I thought in the beginning, I was like, man, we're turning so soft, but as times went on and things were harder and people weren't able to find as good of jobs and that kind of stuff, we've got the best crew that we've ever had. Some of the most loyal people. And again, these are things I can't teach these people. They come in and they've got my best interest, the company's best interest. Sometimes it's just the customer's best interest in mind. And you can't teach that. You got it. And some of that's been word of mouth, you know, where I'll have somebody who's a really good guy, and I'm like, and I tell my people the same thing, like, hey, do you know anybody else that's, you know, sort of like-minded like you, or has, you know, a similar background to you that might be looking to make a change? And just like that sales guy, Ken, that came back, you know, he said, the biggest mistake I ever made professionally was leaving you. He said, I didn't know how good I had it. Somebody who cares about me. And that's the one thing. I mean, we know all of our employees. We care about them, not just as an employee, but on a personal level. You know, there's some compassion in there. And I'm not always that accommodating. Sometimes it's like, under normal circumstances, maybe, but we've got this going on, and I can't allow you to do that today or something. And, you know, I'll say something like, I'll make it up to you, you know, that kind of thing. And then you just make sure you do what you said, and, you know, say what you mean that you're going to do. And the rest of it sort of comes to you.
What about your leaders? Like the people who actually manage all those team members. How did you go about finding the right leaders and investing in them?
You know, there's not a consistent thing on that. One of them I hired as a temp that now runs my office. I mean, another one was a good friend of mine from Colorado. He runs the operations at the SealMaster side. Down at Gem Seal, Daniel, he's got some of the best knowledge in the world on mills and those types of things and emulsions. And I inherited him through the purchase of the company.
Wow.
So it's really different walks of life. Went in and got rid of the ones that were, there's a certain type of employee. I did the same thing at SealMaster. One of Dick's right-hand men, which he told me I was crazy, but I said, first thing I'm doing, he's gone. He said, you can't do that. I said, there's not a job here that I can't and won't do myself. I said, I can absolutely and I will do that. So Dick before we closed, he went in and did it himself, so that he's like, I brought him on. He needs to go. Same thing with Gem Seal when I bought it. There was a couple employees that I knew we won't even do this deal if they're on the docket. They're gone. So I made them agree to that. And then there was a couple that I knew that there were going to be problems with, and we had to eliminate them. It's not that they were bad people. They just, when you're owned by private equity in that world, they had a mentality of 5 o'clock, 4:59, that gate was locked, and they were gone. It's just, and that doesn't fit into my world at all.
Something that Jay and I always struggled with was the fact that we couldn't do what you just said. We couldn't do every aspect of our business. We knew how to market. We knew how to sell. We knew how to schedule. We knew how to hire, but we couldn't seal coat a parking lot. We couldn't patch. We didn't know how to tear apart a piece of equipment. That always hindered us, and we knew it. I've always admired that in you. But I also know that one of the reasons that we were successful was because a lot of the times our number one competition was the guy who could do all that, but he couldn't do the marketing, and he couldn't do the sales, and he couldn't do so I felt like we had an edge up. But what would you say to the guy that has the ability to do it all? How do you keep him from getting trapped into, how did you keep from getting trapped and get out of here? I got this. Because a lot of our competitors were what I would call the mom and pop guys, that they're out there spraying seal coat, or they're paving the parking lot, they're running the paver, they're running the crew, and they're not out there filling their funnel. They're not out there selling.
I think I'm the exception to it, not the norm. And I'll say that by saying this. I've said since I started in this industry, there are good businessmen and there are good pavers and seal coaters. Rarely are they the same person.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, the owner-operators plateau significantly quicker than what the people who don't have that experience will, for 2 reasons. One, they're working in the business, not on the business, which is, I would be further along probably had I had somebody to roll up their sleeves and do that for me. And I could focus on the business rather than in the business. But it wouldn't be nearly the quality, the craftsmanship of where I'm at had I done that either.
Right.
So longevity, I feel like it's sort of the best of both worlds with me, for the fact that, and to this day, I have to force myself, just like today and tomorrow, and the next day, I'm going to be gone. So I have to instill my trust in them. And I tell them, I'm available 24/7. I don't care what it is. If at all you question it, you call me, which has always cost me money when they don't call me, almost 100% of the time. But then I bring them in and I explain to them why I would have done it different, how it would have turned out had we done this or done that, or it may be just in the different order, but done the same thing that they said to do, so that they can live through that experience. Because, and again, it goes back to that employee, or that level of dedication that they have to me, knowing that I have that same level of dedication back to them. So it's part of the teaching process, which again is hard, but I'm at a point now where I can work on the business more, and I can afford to have that cost me a little bit more money and be able to teach those guys that experience. But almost guaranteed every time I'm out of the office, something happens that somebody made a judgment call that cost me more money. Sometimes it's significant, sometimes it's not. Most of the time it's not. But I always make sure I bring them in to explain why I would have done it different or how I would have done it, because the one thing that I can't give them is my experience. And I don't know what they don't know until they show me what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And
That's paying for their education, right?
yeah, no education's free, regardless. Yeah. Whether it's college, it's hands-on. I mean, it all comes at a cost. Sometimes it's yours, sometimes it's others. But
that's right. I remember I had a team member once make a pretty expensive printing error, and he came and he's like, "Oh man, I feel so bad about this. I know I'm probably fired." I'm like, "I'm not gonna fire you. I just spent a lot of money on your education."
Right. Yeah. No, I mean but they don't forget that either, and you know, I've had people screw up to the point where they're like, "Let me pay for it," and I'm like, "That's not how it works. You don't reap the benefit from it. You know, it's not going to cost you." But at the same time, I want you to feel the pain too. So that's why you're sitting across the desk from me, seeing the displeasure in my face, seeing what it did, how it affected, how it shut down, whether it's an aspect of the plant or a truck, a trailer, or cost us money on this or on that. But the good ones buy in. And like I said, post-COVID, I started to really feel like, man, we are just so soft as a nation. And now I feel like even the average ones are special. I mean, they just, and my one thing that I always, there's a couple sayings that I always say is, that's a them problem, not a me problem. My guys love that. And then effort over talent. So you don't have to be the most talented person.
Who is it? Says hard work beats talent when talent won't work hard.
Yeah. Yep. And to the point where my guys will walk around the shop and they're like, you know, if they know they screwed something up, they're like, effort over talent. You know, they like, we joke about it, you know. Yeah. And I'm like, you won't do that again. And then normally there's some guy in the background. He probably will once, maybe twice more, you know, that type of stuff. But so again, getting back to sort of that atmosphere, and the guy that I currently have running our operations was a 20-year veteran of the railroad industry. He worked his way up similar to how I did in SealMaster in the railroad from the bottom to management.
Wow.
Did not have a college degree, so he was handcuffed and going any further. And he was a good friend of mine out in Colorado, and I brought him in, and that is the one thing I'll give that man. He rallies the troops together. If something happens, I don't care if it's 4:59 and guys are starting to wash up and they're getting ready to go home. If he went to them and said, "Guys, we might be here till midnight," every one of them are going to dry their hands, go put their gloves back on, and go out and do it. They have bought in. So whatever he does to rally them, and I don't mess with the pecking order. Obviously, they know if I go out there and I say something needs to be done, I don't always run it past, you know, the right pecking order. But if I say it, they'll do it. But they also know when he comes and says something, it's coming from me too. So
he also worked for you for a lot of years, right?
No. He just within the last 2 years left the railroad and came to work for me.
Wow.
Yeah. He.
Did you have someone in that role prior?
I did. I had another gentleman that had worked for me for years, which is who you're thinking of.
No, I thought that he had worked for you out in Colorado, but okay.
Nope. Nope. But the guy who had worked for me for years had started to get to that point where he was above doing certain things, and that's one thing. I've let guys go. I said what I meant, or I meant what I said earlier. Of there's not a position out there that I can't and won't do. And if I tell somebody to do it and they squawk about it, I'll say, look, you got two options. One is you're going to pack your bags, you're going to get out of my shop. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it in a timely manner that's twice as fast as yours, twice as good as yours. And I'm going to make you look like a fool to everyone else. Or you can get in there and you can take longer and you can do it. And, you know, and they'll dive in or they'll be gone. And I've let several of them go like that over the years that And the guys are always like, "Hey boss, I'll do it." You know, like I'm like, "Nope." Just to show them that there's nothing that I will ever ask them to do that I haven't done or won't do myself. So, and Courtney typically knows when I come home and I'm covered in stuff. She's like, "Did you prove a point today?" I said, "I did." Type stuff. But she's like, "Well, another outfit ruined." I'm like, "Yep."
Wow.
So, I don't know.
I think your stories always impressed me, and I wanted to, David asked me if I knew anybody that might be interesting to sit down and talk to, and you were the first person that came to mind. I don't know that I've ever met anybody with the work ethic and dedication that you have, and not only that, not only in your career, but to your family.
Thank you.
And to your pastimes. You're probably as driven in your pastimes as you are to your family, and you're as driven to your family as you are to your career. And you've got 5 balls in the air, and you're ready to throw another one up. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, wait a minute, you need to go talk to Dick about your succession plan, buddy. But
I appreciate that. That means a lot, especially coming from you.
and I thought you'd enjoy the conversation.
No,
too.
it was fun.
David's
fun.
a great guy, and his team has done a fabulous job for the Blackjack Paving business. And
I don't know if you heard that. I told him outside. There are other people in town that, as far as image and that kind of stuff, they have very similar to what I always, saw Blackjack as. But I always told him that the marketing and the way that they advertised and did all that was a step above almost everyone in the industry, period. And because I'd never met you before, but I had told them that years ago. But I told
thank
them
you.
that again out in the parking lot, just coming in.
I appreciate that.
Well, I think we did a good job in the very beginning of branding ourselves and having a vision. But David told me the first day that I met him, he drove by my office and saw the Blackjack on the side of the building. And he said, that guy, whoever that is, that guy wants to market or wants to market his business. He may not know how to market his business, but he wants to market his business.
But it wasn't just that. I mean, it was whether I was seeing it pop up on Facebook, the videos, the drone footage.
Yeah, and what they did
that's
for us.
what I was talking about.
And that's what they did for us. That's what they did for us. They took us to the next level. They took our desire and turned it into a reality. It was.
And there's not a lot of great marketers in the industry that can work with paving or asphalt companies and make them look good.
Right.
What we were talking about, you have to be this much faster than your competition. Man, the industry as a whole is very underserved.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for us, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank
Really
you for having me.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.